Most photographers should be familiar with using their camera's exposure meter. Its modes, the gist of what it's doing, and that kind of thing. And pretty much, it is the core of how most of us shoot still images. And after a while, it's something we almost never think about. However, for video shooters, there are more tools in your bag than just the exposure meter. And in this video, we are going to take a look at one of those tools, zebra stripes. Now, specifically, we are going to look at how zebra stripes are implemented on the Canon EOS R series of hybrid cameras, at least the ones that support it, which basically means everything except for the EOS R, RP, and R100. I'm going to talk about the menus and options that you have available on the camera, and then I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about how to set up and use the zebra stripes in a more practical perspective. Now, if you're more interested in a detailed technical breakdown of levels and how all of this works at in a fundamental way, then I would recommend you check out my R5C version of this video, where I dig into that kind of underlying operational detail and a lot more details. Now, of course, that video is linked in all of the usual places. So if you're new to video, your first question might just be, what the heck even are zebra stripes? Zebra stripes are an exposure aid that takes their name from the repeating pattern of diagonal black stripes, like a zebra has. Now, depending on the implementation of zebra stripes on your device, you can either have the ability to determine that there's clipping going on, or see that an area is falling within a specific exposure level, or both. In the case of Canon's implementation, it supports both options and can do so simultaneously. On Canon cameras, zebra settings are configured using the Zebra Settings menu page found in video mode. Now, on the EOS R5 and our other R series cameras that were released prior to 2005, you'll find this on page 7 of the red shooting menu section. On the R5 Mark II, R1, and R50, and probably anything going forward, it's now on page 8, or the Assist Shooting page of, again, the red shooting menu section. Upon entering the Zebra Settings menu, you will find 4 options: Zebra, Zebra Pattern, Zebra 1 Level, and Zebra 2 Level. The first entry, Zebra, controls whether or not zebra stripes are displayed. When enabled or turned on, zebras are displayed on all of the camera's displays. This includes the HDMI output if the HDMI display setting is set to external display. Now, unlike some of the other functions you may find in Canon's menus, you don't have to enable zebra stripes to access or change their settings. You can just come into this menu and change them. In addition to using this menu, there are 2 other ways that you can go about toggling zebra stripes. One is using a button function. Now, this is available on all of Canon's EOS R series cameras, and the other is by customizing the quick control menu, which is only available on the R5 Mark II, R1, and R50V. Now, on the R5, the custom button function is configured through the Customize Buttons menu found on page 3 of the orange Custom Function menu section. And on the R50V, the R5 Mark II, and the R1, this is done through the Customize Buttons for Shooting menu found at the top of the Customize Controls When Shooting page, or page 1 of the green Custom Control section. In either case, I have videos that I will have linked in all of the usual places covering the details of the button customization process if you are interested. And also, as I said, on the R50V, the R5 Mark II, and R1, the zebra pattern can be controlled through the quick control menu, although it's not there by default. To set this up, use the Customize Quick Controls menu found on page 7, or the Shutter Control / Assist Shooting page of the red shooting menu. Again, I have a video on this process, which is, again, linked in all of the usual places. Now, in addition to providing a way to toggle zebras on and off, the quick control menu option also includes a shortcut to take you directly into the zebra settings page by pressing the info button, either the virtual one on screen or the physical one on camera, saving you from having to jump into the menus to make adjustments. Now, the second entry in the zebra settings menu controls which zebra pattern is shown. There are 3 options, and they are Zebra 1, Zebra 2, and Zebra 1 Plus 2. Zebra 1 is Canon's name for their zebra-based exposure guide. It allows you to set a brightness level, and the camera highlights areas where the brightness of the image falls within the range of the level that you set. The Zebra 1 pattern is indicated with stripes that slope downward from left to right on the screen. The other pattern is Zebra 2, and this is a clipping warning. In this case, the camera highlights areas that are equal to or brighter than the level that you set this to. When active, the Zebra 2 pattern is indicated by stripes that slope upward from left to right. Now finally, you can enable both patterns with the Zebra 1 Plus 2 option. The striped areas are separated in this mode by their slope, so you know what's supposed to happen, but personally, I find this a little bit difficult to actually comprehend on the fly and in quick succession. The last 2 entries in the Zebra settings menu are Zebra 1 level and Zebra 2 level. Both of these settings control the level the zebra pattern targets. For Zebra 1 level, you can choose a plus or minus 5% exposure range in 5% increments from 5% to 95%. So 10% plus or minus 5%, for example. While Zebra 2 can be set from 50 to 100%, again in 5% increments. Remember, the Zebra 2 pattern is the one that shows or highlights everything that's brighter than your configured level. So, that's all you need to know, right? Well, it turns out that turning on zebra stripes, picking some settings, and just going out and shooting is not quite the entire situation. Regardless of your chosen pattern, the configured level is a percentage of the full range digital signal. Now, while Canon notes this is a percentage on the camera and on all of their documentation, essentially what this is talking about is the same scale or same system that you might see as IRE on other platforms. What this means, though, is that you aren't choosing an exposure or clipping level based on stops or gamma or corrected brightnesses, as you would sort of maybe expect, but is a simple percentage of the digital file's value that's being stored. In effect, 100% corresponds to the maximum digital value, so 255 in an 8-bit system and 1023 in 10-bit formats. And of course, 0% corresponds to 0 in both of those cases. But since this doesn't correct for gamma curves, what that level actually means varies from curve to curve. For example, if the Zebra 2 level is set to 100%, you will never actually see clipping stripes when using Canon log, PQ, or HLG curves. This is because none of those curves actually use the 1023 or the value 1023 in the file. When shooting in Rec 709, 100% may not display either, depending on whether you're using the custom picture system or not, and even then, which profile you're choosing and how you're telling the camera to handle levels above the legal recording limit. So that brings us to the question, how should you set your levels? Starting with the Zebra 2 level. Well, since this is a clipping warning, we want this to be high enough to warn us that, we might actually be clipping, but, not so high that it doesn't actually help. Now, if you are a Canon log shooter, 95% works, and assuming I've done my math correct, which I think I have, this provides either 4/10 or 6/10 of a stop of margin or headroom before actually clipping for log 3 and log 2 curves respectively. Using 90%, of course, increases that threshold to 0.8 stops, or 0.8 or 1.2 stops, respectively, for, again, log 3 and log 2. Now, setting the Zebra 1 level is a little bit more tricky, largely because fundamentally you need to know your subject's reflectivity and then how to convert it into the digital level that represents that in your chosen gamma curve. For example, this is a standard 18% gray card, and I have metered it to get a normal exposure. But when I set my camera to BT709, I have to set the Zebra 1 level to either 40 plus or minus 5% or 45 plus or minus 5% to get it highlighted. It's not 18% in the digital file. The actual level, because of that, falls just below 45% if you go and do the math. However, if you switch your camera over to, say, log 3, then you'll need to adjust the level down to either 30 plus or minus 5% or 35 plus or minus 5%, since the actual digital level for an 18% reflective source in Canon log 3 is 34.3% of the full digital value. Now, the second problem that comes up with the Zebra 1 system is precision. The Zebra 1 range covers 10%, plus or minus 5 percentage points from your chosen set point. For some curves like BT709, this range is quite precise, a half stop or less in many cases. However, for something like Canon log 3, or worse, Canon log 2, that same 10% range covers more than a stop. And in the case of log 2, more than a stop and a half over most of the exposure range. That said, while all of that adds complexity, the advantage you do get from shooting with zebras or using zebras is flexibility and speed. Unlike the regular meter, you pick your reference point or reference level, so you know what you want to be highlighted and where it should fall in your exposure. That's where the flexibility comes from. Now, the speed comes from being able to position your subject anywhere in the frame and get real-time feedback on exposure changes, as opposed to having to hope that the meter is tracking the right thing, which, at least on the hybrid cameras, the meter pretty much does. So, with that in mind, how do you go about setting all of this up? Well, I'm going to first point out that this isn't the only way to do this, but this is what I'm most comfortable with and with talking about, given the actual situation and limitations of Canon Zebra Stripe implementation. So to start with, I wouldn't personally use the zebra stripes as a primary means to set an exposure. Now, don't get me wrong, you can, especially with practice and especially if you're going to take the time to set up and calibrate everything before you start shooting. But as I said, it's also not that precise. And, we're talking about the potential to be off by as much as a stop and a half in some cases with Canon log. Instead, I suggest using a more precise exposure tool to set up your initial exposure. So I'm talking about like a gray card, the camera's meter, a handheld meter, something like that. And then dialing in your zebras so that something that's important in your scene, such as your talent's skin tones, are highlighted when they're exposed correctly. So you're setting it as a secondary test pattern or secondary guidance. Once that's set up, you can use the stripes to confirm that the exposure is still close within the accuracy of the limitations of the zebra stripes, and then of course quickly adjust based on lighting condition changes to at least, again, the accuracy of the zebra stripes. Now, with all that said, I have to admit, I am not a huge fan of Canon's implementation of zebra stripes. It's not the stripes that are the problem, it's the way you configure them or the limitations in configuring them. The Zebra 2 clipping warning is fine, don't get me wrong. It does the job, and for a clipping warning, I don't care that much about exactly dialing in the right level to one value. I want to know that I'm going to clip, and I want to be able to have some headroom so that I can take action if that becomes the case. However, the Zebra 1 exposure reference is, in my opinion, too imprecise for me to be really comfortable with it as a primary tool. In my opinion, at least, it would be vastly more useful if it wasn't limited to 5% increments. 1% would be what I would choose, and if the range was configurable to something narrower than 5%. Again, this is especially true if you are using hybrid log gamma, perceptual quantization, or Canon log curves because of just how much range 10% of the physical of the base digital values are covered by 5% or 10%. Now, with that said, it is a tool, and it's one that can be incredibly useful in the right situations, at least as long as you understand it. Now, finally, if you're interested, as I said, in a much more detailed technical description of the aspects of how Zebra adjustments interact with the various gamma curves, skin tones, and so forth, I have done that in my Zebra Stripes video for the R5C. It is linked at the end screen and in the description below. That said, I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.